Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We say virtual grill room because, of course, we're not in the real grill room, and we won't be able to join our guests there and welcome people to the grill room until after this COVID-19 pandemic is over. In the meantime, we hope that you are sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to seeing you at the Yacht Club just as soon as health conditions permit. Our speaker today is quite a delight, and this is quite a momentous kind of anniversary. Our speaker was born in 1932 in Oakland, California, and raised in Berkeley. In 1936, when he was a whopping 4 years of age, his father bought a Swanson 40 powerboat and named it Patent Pending. 4 years later, they found themselves living on that boat while attending the Golden Gate International Exposition on Treasure Island. So from 1939 to 40, they lived as guests of and attendees at the World's Fair on their beautiful boat in the harbor at Treasure Island. What a charmed place that would be for our speaker today to kind of grow up. In 1940, the family bought their second powerboat, the current Patent Pending. A couple days after Pearl Harbor, which was, of course, December 7th, 1941, 2 days later, they gave up their boat to the Navy to patrol the submarine nets in San Francisco Bay. And the Navy usage of the boat continued until 1945, when the family had the first option to buy back the boat for $100, which they did. From that time until this, Patent Pending has been a fixture on San Francisco Bay and especially welcome in the San Francisco Delta, all the way up to Grindstone Joe's on the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River, where all of us have seen it forever. It's a beautiful yacht, and Mel's story is intertwined with that of his yacht for all these 80 years, the celebration of which is partially celebrated by this Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mel Owens and his trophy daughter, Allison, who's helped him put together this presentation. And I mentioned his trophy daughter because Mel was ably crewed on the yacht Patent Pending for over 40 years by his lovely wife, Gig, who passed away, went up to Valhalla just this most recent April. So Mel, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. It's with a giant Wednesday Yachting Luncheon smile that I welcome you to our program.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. And it's exciting for me to be able to tell you the story of Patent Pending, particularly on the 80th anniversary of our buying the boat. And the boat, of course, is 91 years old. Here are the specs on it, which you can look at your leisure later. She was originally 44 feet, lengthened to 50 in 1930. But that, because this is recorded, you can go onto these things, and I won't spend much time on each one of the pictures. Our tradition started on October 12, 1940. Here's the Patent Pending log. We picked the boat up at the St. Francis from the seller, Eugene Bennett, a trial lawyer at Pillsbury, Madison, and Sutro. And then we took the boat over to Madden and Lewis. You'll see Madden and Lewis did a survey. Here she is on the ways at Madden and Lewis on October 12, 1940. The original name of the boat was Lightnin, and the lightning bolt was there. It lived at the St. Francis Yacht Club. Surveying the boat on that day in October was Pete Swanson, who built our earlier Patent Pending, this boat. And here are the two boats, Patent Pending 1 and Patent Pending 2 at Paradise Cove in 1940. Here's as we lived aboard at the World's Fair, what we call the World's Fair, but it's actually the Golden Gate International Exposition. That's Yerba Buena Island and the bridge, of course, behind. Here was the new Patent Pending a few weeks after the fair closed with my parents. And here were the tickets that were required to get in from the boat dock during the war, and there during the exhibition. And there is the exhibition. It's Treasure Island itself. Here's 41, some of the old classics after a celebration of the 4th of July in Belvedere Cove with the new road on Angel Island. This was 2 weeks after we bought the boat. The fair had closed. There's the Sun Tower and the old Pan American for the Panama Clippers, and this is Clipper Cove now. Dad had a busy year. There is my father, Don Owen. He was Commodore of the Oakland Yacht Club, and he was president of the Pacific Interclub in 41. And because of that, he led the parade. This is April 27th, 1941. The opening day parade was a display of the boats that were ready to deal with the destruction, the theoretical destruction of the bridges, and they would have to evacuate by using the powerboats. My father was in charge of the evacuation of San Francisco during the war by water. Had a list of over 700 boats ready to come in, particularly fishing boats, to come in and pick up and move people off San Francisco shore. Here is Pat Penning repeating itself. We led the parade in 41, and here we are doing it again in 2001. So how did the Pat Penning get to the St. Francis? Lloyd Bacon was the original owner of Pat Penning. He was a Warner Brothers director, directed The Jazz Singer, and Al Jolson crewed for him a lot, and they nicknamed the boat Mammy. Here's Pat Penning as originally launched. You'll notice the stern very crowded in the dinghy here. She was 44 feet 3 inches when launched, and they nicknamed it the Mammy because of the Jolson connection. In 1931, after Lloyd had taken the boat back to Seattle and added 5 feet, he entered the Long Beach to San Francisco race. It mentions here that Mammy, 50 feet, Lloyd Bacon, participated in that race. He thought he'd won. Here's his crew, though. These are the crew that raced from Long Beach to San Francisco. Notice the fuel tanks here, the extra gasoline to get there. She was a single screw, and the crew did quite well. Here is Pat Penning, then Lightnin, on her way from Long Beach to San Francisco. Lloyd thought he'd won. He was sure he had first place. They gave him the second place trophy. And he was so annoyed that he left the boat in San Francisco here in the harbor. And there's your St. Francis. Pat Penning is somewhere in this, I'm sure. This is 1937. We celebrated the 60th anniversary of the boat's launch in 1989 with Lloyd Bacon's daughter, Frances Bacon. And I asked her what was her favorite cruise, and she said, I was sitting here in the cockpit. I am here. Bing Crosby was sitting next to me, and he had a portable record player here on the table, and it was playing 10 cents a dance, and I told everybody below deck, shush, Bing is singing. They made a complete set of Lenox china for the boat with the Lightnin name and Burgess on it. Then the war came along, and in December 7th, 1941, we left the Oakland Yacht Club, went to the St. Francis Yacht Club, and then back. Japan declared war after bombing Honolulu. I was on board. There's my signature. I don't really remember it, but I pretend I do. The next 2 days later, December 9th, Monday, the government called back, wanted Pat immediately. We delivered by noon on Tuesday, December 9th. Here's what we delivered to the Navy. They then sent us a check, which we got early the next year, for $7,000, which was about what we had in the boat. There was an appeal process if you didn't think the price was right, and Don Beacon's father, Reed Beacons, was still arguing with the Navy at the end of the war over the price they offered him. Here is the patrol duty that the Pat Penning and 5 others that's stationed in the Tiburon Net Depot. And here is the actual net across here with the opening, 100-yard opening that they pull open and close to let our ships in and out. This is the St. Francis location here, Point Sausalito here. That and these small boats were stationed at the Tiburon Net Depot. And this is a cable manufacturing facility here that was making cables for the Golden Gate Bridge, as well as cables for the submarine net. Here is the submarine net with the floats. These are reels of wire ready to go to the Golden Gate Bridge earlier. They had this gantry crane that was used originally to load coal on the warships and was not then converted during the war to help load these nets on the barges to go out to place the net. What held the nets down were these 15,000-pound cement anchors. This is at the end of the war where they're removing them. This is another one of the floats that was used to keep it up. Here's the scrap cables, which were simply dumped on the side of the Tiburon at the net depot. And I frequently at low tide, we would see all of these cables. Finally, the environmentalists made them clean it all up, including the handles that held the net down. This is the wartime log for Pat Pending, which was named YP-119. YP stands for Yard Patrol, and all of these small boats. For example, Don Beacon's father's boat, Xanadu, was YP-117 when it was delivered to Treasure Island a half hour before Pat Pending. They practiced with depth charges. This shows depth, drop dynamite number 10, drop dynamite 12. Then here's secured depth charges. The Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, was nice enough to send us a thank you letter in March of 1945 and told us we could place on the stack or in the vicinity of the bridge 5 chevrons, one for each 6 months of duty, and she was 2.5 years. It took me some time, about 40 years, to figure out whether the chevrons should point down or should point up. Finally, I realized and found out that the Navy point down so they can hold water, the Army point up. And here's what the boat looked like. The depth charge, the deck gun had been here, and the depth charges in the cockpit. We offered $10. Actually, we offered $10, yeah. And the Navy said, that's ridiculous, make it 100. And the legislative history, well, I'll get that in a moment. Here's what Pat Pending looked like. And these pictures were taken as part of the legislative history of Public Law 305, which Dad wrote, requiring the Navy to offer the boats that they took to the original owner for fair market value. And Pat Pending at that point was worth $100. This is Dad's estimate here. You got an estimate from Anderson, Walter Anderson of Anderson Christophany Boatyard that it would cost $375 to repair the bow. Actually, Dad says it came to $2,453. Here's what Pat looked like after 9 months of restoration at the Anderson Christophany Yard down the peninsula. And you'll see the open deck here. We added a steering station, but no windshield, but a steering station here. The rebuild cost $24,000. And my sons a few days ago figured out what that would be today in dollars, and it would be $353,000. The post-war years, we spent a lot of time at Grindstone. This is not post-war, this is 1932, and these are all Stevens yachts. And this next week, this year, the Stevens yachts are parading in Stockton and celebrating the return of Folly, this boat right here, Folly 2, which has lived for years at the St. Francis when Cummins of Cummins Diesel owned it, and is now owned by Rusty Arenas. And he'll have this be totally restored this coming week. Here's a more accurate, more current. In fact, here, these trees, you can barely see these trees have just been planted by Joe. Here's his cabin, and you'll see those trees have grown quite a bit. Typical day at the grindstone on Pat Bending, my mother and myself and my sister. More current, here it's current Pat at the dock. Most of the time we were in the Oakland Yacht Club, but we came every weekend to Belvedere and Belvedere Cove. And Dad put in these little moorings, the yellow and black moorings, fore and aft. We'd come over and tie up fore and aft. Dad had an electric line placed over to the China cabin. He'd row ashore, throw the switch, and we'd have electricity for the whole weekend instead of running our generator. We moved in 1957 after the harbor was built to this berth where the boat has been now for 63 years. These covers were too hard to take on and off. We got better covers later. San Francisco Yacht Club built this harbor in 1957. Here is the harbor just completed. There's Pat Bending in her berth. And my mother wrote this poem. This one line is worth it. The project this past year, which has been Don's pet, was financing the harbor so there'd be no club debt. And that worked out pretty well with the sale of the bonds that entitled you to a lifetime to rent that berth. The last $50 bond 30 years later sold for $47,000. Pat Bending did a lot of entertaining, and music was always aboard. My mother and I started playing in 1936, and her favorite was this. She called it the No Handies. We had a lot of parties, many over the years. Here was the Cal crew in the estuary. Here's an opening day parade being blessed. Had a good crowd on board. This was another little boat called Anticipation that we bought and had for many years. Some of our entertaining, here is at the St. Francis guest dock, of course. So that's the Tunisian flag, and that's the Prime Minister of Tunisia. This was an official state visit. We were swept for bombs before we went out. We were followed by rifle high carrying security people. And here, when you have time, you can read some of the fun parties we had on board. This is particularly interesting. There's Sir Ben Ainsley and Tom Perkins. Apparently, Sir Ben couldn't stay. Well, you'd appreciate this. When Sir Ben came aboard, my wife, Gig, said, Sir Ben, and he said, no, it's just Ben. And my wife said, that's good because I'm just Gig. Here was another river trip, mostly, I think, college friends with Allison. But my favorite trip was this one. 47 Delta Gamma girls. We called it DG Day on the Delta. A lot of boats were circling Pat Bending, and my two sons, who were 15 and 17, I think, one of them said, Dad, what's wrong with this picture? You're too old and we're too young. We entertain a lot of the classic yachts. We share events. Here was a cruise in. This was quite recent at the San Francisco guest dock. There's Pat Bending as usual. I was surprised to learn that the harmonica attracts some of the pirates that are still on Treasure Island. That was good. We went out to greet the Maltese Falcon when Tom Perkins brought it in and announced 2 o'clock on the Saturday. And here is Pat Bending. It looks like a tender to the 300 plus Maltese Falcon. Another day chasing the Queen Mary when her came into the bay. As we went out to greet her, it was totally flat. Then the tide changed and the wind came up and all of the boats were speeding to keep up, and it was a challenge with the following sea. In 1997, Pat Pending was sinking at the dock, where the San Francisco Yacht Club was halfway down. We were able to haul it over to the Richards Bay Boatyard, haul it out, and it was basically worthless at that point. The rot and the wood was worn out, tired. I met with my sons at Taddich Grill and I said, do you boys want to inherit a few dollars or a boat? And they said, we'd rather have the boat. So for 3.5 years, she was at this dock. And luckily we had Carl Shoemaker advising us on the redesign on the interior and how to make it right. Here you'll see the new planking, everything new, planking, ribs, decks, electrical. I reinstalled the original Hall Scott engine, but that didn't work out, so I had to replace it later. Here's the interior redesign. Carl did a fabulous job. We widened the sole, put in some handholds for more security. And my wife, she never knew how much I spent, and nobody does except one son. But my wife said, I don't care what the party costs, we're going to have a great party. So this was the rechristening of the Pat Pending, November 25, 2000. And Martin McNair officiated. There's myself and my wife, Gig. We had 360 guests for the party, had other classics participate. There we are breaking my son, Lawson. And here's the family celebrating, had each member of the family raising a different flag. And the yacht club honored us with the cover shot of their bulletin. And there's Gig and myself in 2001 enjoying the completed reconstruction. I thought we needed another Pat Pending. So I hired Paul Reck to make a model of Pat Pending 1/2 inch. He started with these 2 planks. And it was amazing. He had to measure the Pat because there were no working drawings. There had been a fire at the Lake Union boatyard in 1942. So he had to measure for days to get the right dimensions. And he was a fantastic model builder. Here is what I call Paul's boatyard, also known as his garage. Here's the finished product. Pat Pending, the little Pat, is sitting in the San Francisco Yacht Club on loan and on display. The detail that Paul put into it was just amazing. I also had Jim DeWitt do a painting of Pat Pending, which I enjoy here at home. And this was where Pat patrolled during the war. There's the Golden Gate Bridge behind, a very typical and delightful Jim DeWitt painting. It's really been about family the whole time. And we have now, this was some years ago, all of them on the bow of Pat Pending, my wife, myself, and so on. There's Allison that's helped me put together these slides. It's been an amazing time, 80 years, and the family, it's now 4th generation, and I'm hoping they can continue to. And thank you, Ron. Enjoyed sharing the history of 80 years, 91 years total of Pat Pending.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mel. It's great to hear the story of Pat Pending. I've been an admirer of the boat for all these years. Tell me, why was there practices before the war? You said there were practices of evacuating San Francisco. Why was there a need to practice evacuating? There hadn't been a war yet.
Well, what they thought theoretically the bridges might be bombed out. Actually, it was during the war that I think they saw the war coming, and Dad also went on patrol on December 7th. That night he went on patrol on a boat called Miyahilo. What they could do, I don't know, but they did patrol all night. And they took probably 700 or more boats into the Navy because they were so short of picket boats. They were all called YP. I still have his notes of all of the boats that he had ready to come in. And in fact, in April of 1943, we had a rehearsal of the evacuation. We had 2,000 civil defense workers come down to the St. Francis Harbor there and put them on board boats, cruised around to the peninsula, and then bust them back to see if the evacuation plan that Dad had made would work. Luckily, we never had to find out in the real world.
So how fast was patent pending? How fast does she go now and what RPM?
Well, Dad had a note in the log. She did 18 knots when we first bought it. Now top speed is 14. We cruise usually at 10 or 12. And that's with a single screw.
That's very fast. 18 is very fast.
Yeah.
What's the RPM now when you're going 14, your top speed?
On this new engine, that's about 2,200.
Now talk about the accommodations of the boat. The boat's currently what length, what draft, what beam?
11.6 beam, 50 length, draws about 4.5 feet. Very comfortable hull. And when we rebuilt it, we could have put in a bow thruster. And I have a thing about bow thrusters. I can't stand them. And with a single screw, we're a little more challenged, but it's a lot more fun.
That's great. So now I've had the pleasure of being on the boat, but for our visitors on the who are viewing right now, let's talk about accommodations on the boat. Tell us a little bit about accommodation.
The forward cabin, captain's cabin, has a head and a comfortable double. The aft cabin, one side has a couch that makes into a double bed, good sized bed, and another head in the galley. And then the cockpit can sleep 3 actually. It's quite comfortable. The cockpit, because of the addition of that extra space, will seat 12 people comfortably around the table. In the upper deck, we put into the upper deck and raised the railings so that we called it the grandchildren's deck in 1962. And that's where people congregate around, and it is the favorite spot.
For years, I've seen the boat so often up to the Delta. Give us a weekend in the life of the boat going up to the Delta.
The cruise up is the fun part because you start out and it's cold and you've got a sweater on, and you get through San Pablo and you get starts to warm up. You take the sweater off. You get up Benicia and then a little further into New York Slough, and you take off your shirt, and then we always have a bet on who will spot Grindstone Joe's trees first, and also another side on what time we will arrive. And if I'm at the wheel, we usually arrived about right because I could adjust the speed, but I usually didn't cheat. But then we have a Boston whaler that we call the trademarker, that a lot of water skiing and fun with that, exploring the Delta that way. And we also carried on board for many years 2 El Toros on top of the roof. They were sail numbers 97 and 98.
So now, what time would you usually leave to go up to the Delta, and what time would you arrive?
Well, it was usually 7 hours, and we would try to catch a tide, so that determined what time we would leave. But going up, we could usually catch a flood tide. Coming back, we were never over 60 years or so, never able to time it right to have help running downriver. For some reason. And San Pablo Bay was always the challenge. We lost the engine cut out on us in the middle of San Pablo Bay on a Saturday night at 6 o'clock. And we had the whaler, but we couldn't tow Pat Pending with the 16-foot Boston whaler. Luckily, we called our mechanic. He was close to his boat, came out and towed us in. Always an adventure.
What's the displacement of Pat Penning? How heavy is she?
17 net tons, 21 gross.
When you would leave, give somebody who wonders these questions over and over and over again, would you leave an hour before max flood at the Golden Gate? Would you live 2 hours before max flood? What's the rule?
Probably an hour. And obviously depends on a lot of different things. We're never too successful at it, but it was fun to try.
I know people are always talking about trying to come back, and I said what you said a moment ago many times. It's impossible to figure out the ideal way to come back. It's a very complex algorithm because, of course, max ebb is not the same at the Golden Gate Bridge, at Carquinez, etc. And depends upon whether it's a big flood or a light flood. We get one of each every day. So now talk a little bit about people talk about a day in the life. Let's talk about a weekend in the life of Pat Penning at StFYC. What's a typical weekend for you? What's the life on the boat like?
The last few years, it's basically been entertaining. I don't stay on board overnight anymore. And have a crowd. We do a cruise, maybe show friends West Shore Road. Always love to cruise down West Shore, be a voyeur, look in all the houses. But we don't go down as far as we used to. The tide or the depth isn't what it used to be on that West Shore Road. Plus, we don't want to disturb the growth, the algae and growth that's going on. But go over to Paradise Cove. We occasionally scatter friends, and we name a cove or a beach after whoever we scatter. I'm running out of beaches, unfortunately, in coves. But I reserved one for myself on Tiburon Peninsula. So
now you had a model made by the great model maker, Paul Reck. And by golly, he is such a great craftsman. Talk to us about the process of getting a model made with Paul Reck.
Paul was amazing. In fact, he's celebrated 90, I think, and he wants to do a Pat Penning, a model of Pat Penning from the War Years in the all gray, add a deck gun and so forth. Paul is just amazing. I didn't know him until we started this project, and he was quite excited about it. We had a good time building it.
How long was the project?
About 6 months, a little better than 6 months.
And how often would you meet tell people who haven't had a model made what the process is like. How often would you meet and so on?
I dropped by his Flowchart in Mill Valley, close by, and maybe every couple of weeks. It was a fairly slow process. Your St. Francis friend,
R.C. Keefe.
Yeah, he was, I run into him occasionally at the boatyard, at Paul's boatyard, and he was very annoyed that Paul was working on a non-St. Francis boat. Paul knew how to deal with him.
Yes. Well, in RC's defense, he has actually facilitated the development of one of the great yacht model collections in the world, actually, now. And it's taken him like 25 years, 30 years, but he's actually done an incredible job. And it's understandable that he'd feel kind of possessive of one of the great model builders in the United States.
I think Paul's done what, 19 or 20, I think, for your club.
Well, I belong to both clubs. My San Francisco Yacht Club models are just as important as the St. Francis models, but the facilitator, R.C. Keefe, has really pushed lots of models. So now talk about the process of having a Jimmy DeWitt painting made of your boat.
Jim is a good friend. We met him Antigua Sail Week. Pig and I were there on the same boat. In fact, Jim was the only one that knew how to sail this 72-foot sloop during sail week. But I got to know him, and finally decided I definitely had to have a Jim to win the patent pending.
Absolutely, but talk to people about the process. So you say, you say, Jimmy, all of us have known Jim for, like half a century.
Of course.
So you say, Jim, I want you to paint patent pending. He gets a huge, big Jim Do It smile, and then talk about next step. What happens next?
Well, we talked about where to place it, and where she patrolled, where we crossed the slot thousands of times with the gate behind. But he really knew approximately what he wanted.
Did you give him some photographs?
Yes, but he really didn't need that much. But I have a few pictures of Pat Penny. You can imagine with 80 years how many pictures I have.
So tell me something. Tell me a funny story about Pat Penny.
One trip we had Pete McCloskey, the senator, ran for Congress down the peninsula against Shirley Temple. He was a little moderate for some of the people on board, and they wanted to throw him overboard, but we didn't. In fact, we've only had one fall overboard, and that was on our way back into Belvedere Cove when he reached for the handrail to go to the forward deck, and he reached the boat hook instead and went overboard. But no injuries, no injuries.
So tell me a scary story in the years of you owned Pat Penny.
Okay, this would have been 1930. In 1939, on the first Pat pending, Mother was at the wheel, and Dad was mopping the upper deck in the estuary, and Dad fell overboard. And Mother pulled around, and it looked like he was bleeding on his back. And she was able to pick him up. He wasn't bleeding, it was the copper paint. In those days, we paint as we did at Madden and Lewis on October 12. Mother has a note, painted copper paint on the bottom. And that was obviously to preserve, and the boat was put back in with it wet, and that's why Dad looked as though he'd been injured, but luckily he wasn't. Environmentalists, of course, ruled out copper paint years ago. We used to sneak it in from Nevada, but that's a long time ago.
So where do you haul her out now when you get her hauled out?
Still go to the Richardson Bay Boat Yard. That's the Marine Ships #2 ways, the railroad ways. And that's where she spent 3.5 years. And we still go there. Ross Summers, Harold Summers' son, has been running it for years, does a terrific job.
How often do you haul her out? Tell people how often you haul a 50-footer like this.
With the new hull, we do about every 2 years. We used to do it every year. And we have to do it at least every 3 for our insurance purposes to have the survey.
So now when you did the restoration, we all know Carl Shoemaker as a really talented yacht designer. He was the first guy ever to say the word form stability to me. Very, very talented yacht designer, sailboat designer. But few of us have known of his powerboat work. What was it like to work with Carl Shoemaker on restoring the powerboat patent pending?
Well, he was extremely helpful and a friend. In fact, we had the privilege of taking his family out for his service when we had a parade of his boats that he designed out of the St. Francis. But for example, people suggested we replace the gas engine with the diesel. And Carl suggested that wasn't probably a good idea.
How do you maintain low fumes, which is the dangerous part about gasoline? Talk about that.
Not bad unless you have the side curtains up in the cockpit. You don't get any fumes. We found out that you put those side curtains up, it just sucks it in. It's called the station wagon effect. In fact, Don Beacon's had new covers made for his cockpit and had the screen down, was coming down San Pablo on Seabreeze. Almost all of them were knocked out. And it took weeks to get rid of the effect of the carbon monoxide. And it is a good warning to always be very careful on that carbon monoxide.
Now, one of your early slides showed the site plan of San Francisco Bay and the submarine net that went stretched across from St. Francis over to Sausalito. Could that net have actually stopped a submarine trying to come into the bay?
I think so. We do know that one two-man sub could get into the bay. We found it out after the war. Probably followed in one of our big ships when they pulled open the gate, that 100 yards, which they would open for our ships. Snuck in, snuck back out again. We didn't find that out till after the war. But I think it would have stopped a sub.
You said a two-man sub. That's kind of news. So back in those days, we're thinking about subs like crews of 40, 50, but you're saying this is a little small, almost like nowadays recreational sub, just a little two-man sub.
Well, the Japanese subs were built to carry these. They'd come over on a big sub. They also carried airplanes. The amusing story, the airplane up in the Northwest, the sub came, they unloaded the airplane with pontoons and so forth, loaded it with incendiary bombs, took off and was going to start a huge forest fire, but it was raining. None of the fires caught. The plane got back, was folded up, put back on the sub and went home.
So now we've heard these reports about powerboats being used, even sailboats being used on coastal patrol. And your log would show going on coastal patrol. What would a yacht do if they did see, a Japanese military craft?
The Pat Penny had the depth charges, and if they found a sub or something, and they had the deck gun, they were kind of a warship, and they all were outfitted with some ammunition, and also they were reporting to airplanes that could come if they spotted something. So it was spotting as well as actually stopping enemy ships or boats.
So in all the years that you've had patent pending, how many days a year do you think you were on the boat?
Personally, probably 15 or 20. My older son, Greg, would take Pat Pending up and leave it for 2 months at Grindstone, and then go up on weekends. We'd go up on weekends occasionally. But we don't use it as much as we should, but we use it a lot more than many boats. You see all these boats sitting there year after year and never getting out, paying insurance and berthing and so forth. In fact, the San Francisco Yacht Club recently did a survey of the growth on the bottoms of the boats and suggested people clean those up and get the boats out more often.
So talk to us about special occasions on the boat. Have you had weddings on the boat?
Well, we do weddings, of course.
How many weddings? You do several weddings a year? Is that what you're telling me?
Not too many. More memorial services than weddings. But when we do a wedding, we go to Paradise, of course. You want to be married in Paradise Cove. We've renamed it Wedding Cove. The one wedding we did there, they were from Hawaii. They're very into Hawaii. So they had 4 Hawaiian singers. One of them weighed at least 400 pounds. And I was going to put them on the aft cabin on the roof of the cockpit, but he would have fallen right through. So I left the music on shore and I had to play it myself.
Well, Mel, it's real fun to learn all about patent pending. Such a great, historic boat on San Francisco Bay. And as the owner of a boat built in 1937, it's great to talk to people who really understand old boats, old wooden boats, my heavens. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's been fun and a bit of an honor to hear the whole story of patent pending. So thanks very much. And with that, the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
As you do know, Ron, if this had been at the club, I couldn't have worn my hat.
That's true. You couldn't have worn the hat if we'd been at the club. Anyway, great talking to you, Mel. Thanks so much. With that, the Yachting Luncheon is adjourned.